We want to keep the ball rolling here on some Texas, Alabama talk. Keep doing Texas football. And on the phone with us right now, on the Vaqueros Cafe and Cantina hotline, Joe Cook, the managing editor of InsideTexas. You can follow him at JosephCook89 on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it. You can follow him there. But he's in to talk some Texas football. Joe, how you doing, brother?
Doing great, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so let's start off with the big recruit from yesterday. They get Zine Umuzulu. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, from Allen, Texas. 4-star edge. What does this do for Texas in recruiting to get another big recruitment on the edge?
Yeah, this is probably the weakest position on the roster on defense. If you look at it from a star perspective, from a production perspective. So to add someone like Umuzulu and pair him with someone like Colin Simmons, who's one of the top 5 players in the country, that's great news for that class. And the other thing is they fit different positions. They'll play on opposite sides of the line. So you've addressed 2 different needs with the addition of him in the class. And, of course, it's always good to do well at a big power program like Allen, and also make sure you land family members. It's not always been a guarantee with Texas in recent years, but it's nice to see Neto's little brother is going to join be joined on the roster. Neto is going to have his little brother join him on the roster. There we go. So they're still looking for a couple more defensive end edge rushers in this class. But to add Umuzulu, especially at Oklahoma and Texas A&M's expense, is a pretty nice pickup for the Longhorns.
Yeah, it is one of those things in today's game, too, where it's get as many as you can because you don't know how many are going to stay and you don't know how many are going to work out. And we know at Texas, you get enough 5 stars and 4 stars and everything else. And if you don't get the right ones and you don't work them out right, it doesn't end up doing much. But let's get into let's talk a little bit about last week before we get into Alabama. Biggest takeaway from you from week 1, and you can't say offensive line because we know it's the offensive line. But what other than the offensive line, what's your biggest takeaway from week 1?
I think the discussion over the past week about Texas football has been a big battle between, it was all vanilla, don't worry, they weren't showing anything for Rice, and oh no, it was still bad because of the offensive line and stuff like that. I think the truth is a little bit in the middle. You didn't see a lot of motion. Keelan Robinson, who is going to be a big part of this team, only had 2 total offensive touches. Like those are different aspects of Steve Sarkisian's offense that we're definitely going to see a lot more of. But despite being, plain, I guess, by Sarkisian standards, there was some lack of execution, miscommunication on the offensive line. The deep ball, of course, continues to be an area of, lack of success, I guess to say. So a little bit of both, but it's all stuff that doesn't really it's stuff that can be addressed, and it's stuff that can be addressed just by throwing more things at Alabama. You don't have to maybe shore up what they ran versus Rice, but they can throw more at Alabama and confuse them that way. But I think the same probably holds true on the other side for how the Crimson Tide treated Middle Tennessee as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it was one of those things that I like, is there any explanation for the O-line play? Because we saw what happened, and it wasn't so much, Kelvin Banks having a bad day. That happens. You don't want to see it, but it happens. But the amount of free runs at a quarterback, there's no way a coach thinks, you know what, before we play the biggest game of the year, let's hit the defense tee off on them a few times. Is there any explanation for how much they just missed free runs at the quarterback and missed guys over and over again throughout that game?
Like miscommunication. I mean, that's I think one of the big ones that you're referencing was there was supposed to be a pass off, I think, between Kelvin Banks and Hayden Connor. And that's, it's a true sophomore and a true junior, yeah. I think, or maybe a redshirt sophomore, third-year player. But that's supposed to be taken care of. It's not all on Jake Majors, but he has to make sure that communication is up to snuff. And then, I'm also looking at DJ Campbell. He had 5-star billing, but that's because he had 5-star athleticism and 5-star strength. But there was some processing of the image in front of him. That was not 5-star, and that's some of the warts you have to deal with when looking at true freshmen and also true sophomores making their first start. We'll see how Texas decides to handle that. Cole Hudson could be an option, who started all 13 games last year. But, the similar pitfalls there, and, of course, Neto Umuzulu, Zena's older brother, could be an option on the inside as well. But I'm not sure about the idea of throwing somebody out there versus Bama for their first career start or first extended action in Bryant-Denny Stadium. We'll see if they mix it up, but as far as starting goes, I'd be surprised if Connor was upended, but you may see a little bit more Cole Hudson and potentially even in the starting lineup on Saturday to try to address those O-line issues.
Yeah, and I mean, the communication is clearly one of the biggest issues, and that was a home game against Rice. It was not going to be as loud as what you're going to have going into Tuscaloosa. But the other part of this, too, the running backs, the stats look pretty good. Some of the plays looked really good with the running backs. Some of the plays didn't. But you wanted to see, I personally wanted to see a running back really step out into and be the guy. And I don't think we saw that any running back. Did any running back make their case in Sark's eyes to be the guy, to be the definite starter that we don't have to do this dance every week? Or is it going to be by committee till further notice?
I think Sark was probably holding back a little bit. The leading rusher was Jaden Blue, and he performed really well, had 12 carries, but I'd be surprised if he was the leading rusher again this week. I thought Jonathan Brooks, you look at that drop and you have to weigh that, and that's the play that you have your running backs make. But I look at that touchdown and, making the one-man miss and then running away from the rest of the tacklers as just, those are the types of plays that you need your running backs to make. And C.J. Baxter made one too until he got hurt at the end of it. And, Sark is he says a lot of things, and sometimes he leaves things unsaid. He said he's looking forward to seeing Baxter out there and expects he's going to be available. But, until he says something like, yeah, he's playing and he's going to start, I'm going to be a little bit wary of how much we see of Baxter if he's on a pitch count. So I think you can go along with Brooks and still do well, as long as, like I mentioned, you mix up the offense some and don't make him have to do every single thing in the running game.
Yeah, and you're expecting to see Keelan Robinson a lot more than we saw him this week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. More than 2 touches, and especially for him, he's had this game circled for a while. He's ready to go back to Tuscaloosa and make a few plays on his whole team.
Yeah, you could tell that one. So, all right, so let's move on to Alabama now, and what's going into it. If you had to name the biggest concern you have, I know there's plenty of concerns anytime you go into Tuscaloosa, anytime you play against a coach like Nick Saban. There's plenty to worry about. What's your biggest worry on the Texas team of something that needs to be fixed or something that you're not sure is going to show up come Saturday?
You said on the defense?
On either side, just on our side of the ball.
Oh, I got you. Well, I mean, here's a lot of players on this team were on the roster in 2021, and they went to an Arkansas Razorback stadium that was pretty vicious, not friendly in the slightest, definitely the largest stadium that they played in outside of DKR and the most hostile, and they didn't really fare very well. And Steve Sarkisian's talked about how he didn't have that team prepared, and he believes that there's a lot more mental fortitude with this team, and I'm inclined to believe him. But, I mean, Texas doesn't play in front of 100,000, hostile fans. They play in front of 100,000 friendly fans or, 50,000 at the Cotton Bowl who are friendly and 52 who are hostile, or maybe even, 65,000 at Iowa State. But that's the biggest Big 12 stadium they go to. I'm really curious to see, despite everything we talk about with the team, the defensive tackles being a strength, Jalen Ford being good, the defensive backs being deep, wide receiver being deep, all the different stuff. This team's got to prove they can do it in front of a crowd of 100,000 who want them to fail play after play. And I think, this team, like I said, it's equipped to do it, but you got to show it. And I think everybody's waiting to see how that goes.
Yeah, that Arkansas game ruined Father's Day. Really, really not a fun one. Ruined Father's Day with me and my dad. Talking to Joe Cook, managing editor of Inside Texas. You can follow him at JosephCook89 on X. So one of the big concerns of Texas last year, a big concern basically of any defense, but especially with the mobile quarterback of Jalen Milroe for Alabama. The defense looked great against Rice, but it's Rice. What does Texas need to do to get off the field on 3rd downs and 4th downs in this game? Because it killed them last year.
They got to keep Jalen Milroe in front of them, and I think that's why you may not see a ton of man coverage, at least on 3rd down or in those situations, because if he sees the back plate, the name plate, he's probably going to tuck and run. They just got to keep him in front of him. And I'm not saying to spy, because I think a lot of times people say, just spy him every play. Well, that's that basically renders you 10.5 on 10. It messes with the structure of a defense. But they'll definitely have guys keeping eyes on them as they do, and you'll probably see a lot more zone coverage on third down. Still, they're going to have to try and get after him. Texas showed off some varied formations this past week on defense. They haven't really shown a lot throughout the Pete Kwiatkowski era, and that'll probably muddy the picture for a player who, of all his strengths, his weaknesses are going through progressions and seeing where to go with the football, even with pressure in his face. So it's either get after him and get him down or keep you in front of him and hope that and force him to pick apart defenses in a way that he has not, in his short career, proven to be able to do quite yet.
Yeah, you just can't allow the blitz to get past him and not bring him down. Because once you start playing that game, Jalen Milroe's going to kill you. So if Texas can do what they do on defense, you know, you hope that the offense clicks together. But how does Texas find a way to win this game against Alabama, going against a more experienced Alabama team, at least of playing big games, and they're at home? How does Texas get a win?
I think they have to pick on some of the younger members or maybe the second-string guys on the Alabama secondary. They've got Kool-Aid McKinstry, owner of one of the best names in college football, but still a really talented player. But some of their starters on defense, including a U.S. transfer and a couple other guys, are banged up. So there's going to be they're Alabama second stringers, but they're Texas wide receivers. It should be one of the strongest units on the team. And Texas is able to press those guys who may not be quite used to having to do that on a play-by-play basis. Now, there's a freshman for Bama, and there's a tier of players, or I guess I should say a tier of player when it comes to praise that only has one name in it right now, and it's Minkah Fitzpatrick, who played for Steelers. I think he's on the Dolphins now, if I remember right. But Nick Saban would constantly praise Minkah Fitzpatrick, no matter what point in his career he was at, about being just prepared and being able to translate preparation to athleticism. And I think Caleb Downs may enter that conversation by the time he's done at Bama. A true freshman, makes a lot of plays at safety. Got to watch out for him, but you got to make life difficult for him because the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders are not the same. They don't have the same wide receiver core as Texas has with A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, all those different guys. So I think if Texas wins this game, it's because they let the wide receivers work in space, get the ball, and worked on a Alabama defensive backcourt that may not be at 100% already in week 2.
There you go. Talking to Joe Cook from Inside Texas. Sark loves a gadget play, loves a little, trickery, or not even trickery, but just trying to throw some different things against the wall with all the wide receivers you have now, with the running backs like a Keelan Robinson who can get out and catch. How much do you think Sark throws different things at this Alabama defense early in the first half? And how much of it do you think he tries to hold back and not play his cards too much early? Is this a Sark, let's go full force early, or does he sit back and try and play the game out?
I think that script's going to have a lot of different things. It kind of depends on what personnel he wants to throw. I know there are a lot of fans who say, throw tempo. Well, Sark likes throwing a lot of different personnels, multiple running backs, multiple tight ends, that type of thing. That takes substitution. So I would honestly side with the idea of tempo and force Alabama to defend, 3 wide receivers on the field and Jatavian Sanders. Use other stuff as a mix-up, short yardage, things like that. But I would see how much Sark can emphasize tempo and see if that's something that may catch Alabama by surprise and force them into a defensive personnel package that may not be their best at this early juncture.
Yeah, I do like that. I do like switching up and running some tempo and trying to get up with with a team that is mostly returning a ton of starters. You may be able to get that done. So we know we got one more for you. One more question before we let you go. We know that Sark has said that this is not a statement game, that it's a benchmark game. It lets you see where you're at, but not necessarily define your season. But in reality, how much does this game affect the team, win or lose? We know, you can still make the college football playoff if you lose. Either team can. But mentally and going forward in the season, how big is this game going to weigh on these players and this team?
Well, the physical aspect is always there. I mean, Texas, the thing about going to the SEC is, you play Bama, but then you got to turn around and play someone like Auburn or Arkansas the week after. And Texas doesn't have that with Wyoming, but luckily, even if they're going to be, they're going to be physically feeling the effects of, however many straight weeks of football, if you count the Rice game, the Bama game, which counts as a little bit more than others, and then all training camp. So they're going to have to factor that in when they face a game Wyoming team next week. But as far as mentally, it'll be huge. A lot of it has to do with scheduling, because Texas is the first Power 5 non-conference opponent to go to Bryant-Denny since 2010. But teams don't beat Bama at home. Only 8 have under Saban, and it took a few national champions or Heisman winners to get it done, like Cam Newton, Joe Burrow, Johnny Manziel, those guys to have that happen. So if Texas is able to pull it off, they're going to be feeling pretty darn good about themselves. But I think the coaching staff understands, after also, looking at Wyoming after Tech lost to them, that they still have a test next week. So they'll celebrate it. I mean, any team celebrates wins, and any win against Alabama, should it happen, would be one definitely worth celebrating and telling a bunch of different high schoolers around the state and country about. But they'll recognize that it's not a conference game, and it won't be one till next year. And even though they're not on the 2024 schedule, and that doesn't affect their standing with the Big 12, which is basically the goal they've talked about most about this season. They never talked in the preseason about, like, our goal is to beat Alabama and just leave it at that. The goal of the preseason always been to win the Big 12 as they head out. Bama would be a nice feather in the cap to have as they do that, if they want to also add playoff contention. So a lot of different things going on, but they have to make sure they're ready for, the rest of the season, both mentally and physically, no matter what happens on Saturday.
There you go. Joe Cook there, managing editor of Inside Texas, at Joseph Cook 89. Give him a follow. He is a very good follow if you want to follow what's happening with Texas football. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, Patrick. Let's do this more.
Yes, we'll have you back on soon. Talk more. Hopefully celebrating an Alabama win over Alabama next week. We'll be doing that. Thanks, Joe.